with the rise of Puritanism among the Reformed Church of England. See Anglicanism. 32. The hobgoblin, once a friendly household spirit, became classed as a wicked goblin. 33. Dealing with fairies was considered a form of witchcraft and punished as such. 34. In William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Oberon, king of the fairies, states that neither he nor his court fear the church bells, which the author and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis cast as a politic disassociation from fairies. 35. Although Lewis makes it clear that he himself does not consider fairies to be demons in his chapter on the topic, the Longavi or long livers from the discarded image. In an era of intellectual and religious upheaval, some Victorian reappraisals of mythology cast deities in general as metaphors for natural events. 36. Which was later refuted by other authors. See The Triumph of the Moon by Ronald Hutton. This contentious environment of thought contributed to the modern meaning of fairies. One belief held that fairies were spirits of the dead. 37. This derived from many factors common in various folklore and myths, same or similar tales of both ghosts and fairies. The Irish Cid origin of their term for fairies were ancient burial mounds deemed dangerous to eat food in fairyland and Hades. The dead and fairies depicted as living underground. 38. Diane Purkis observed an equating of fairies with the untimely dead, who left unfinished lives. 39. One tale recounted a man caught by the fairies, who found that whenever he looked steadily at a fairy it appeared as a dead neighbor of his. 40. This theory was among the more common traditions related, although many informants also expressed doubts. There is an outdated theory that fairy folklore evolved from folk memories of a prehistoric race. Newcomers superseded a body of earlier human or humanoid peoples, and the memories of this defeated race developed into modern conceptions of fairies. Proponents find support in the tradition of cold iron as a charm against fairies, viewed as a cultural memory of invaders with iron weapons displacing peoples who had just stone, bone, wood, etc. at their disposal, and were easily defeated. 19th century archaeologists uncovered underground rooms in the Orkney Islands that resembled the elfland described in Childe Roland 42, which lent additional support. In folklore, flint arrowheads from the Stone Age were attributed to the fairies as elfshot. 43. While their green clothing and underground homes spoke to a need for camouflage and cover shelter from hostile humans, their magic and necessary skill for combating those with superior weaponry. In a Victorian tenet of evolution, mythic cannibalism among ogres was attributed to memories of more savage races practicing alongside superior races of more refined sensibilities. A theory that fairies et al. Were intelligent species distinct from humans and angels. 45. An alchemist, Paracelsus, classed gnomes and sylphs as elementals, meaning magical entities who personify a particular force of nature and exert powers over these forces. 46. Folklore accounts have described fairies as spirits of the air. Much folklore of fairies involves methods of protecting oneself from their malice by means such as cold iron charms, see amulet, talisman of rowan trees or various herbs, or simply shunning locations known to be theirs, ergo avoiding offending any fairies. 48. Less harmful pranks ascribed to fairies include tangling the hair of sleepers into fairy locks, aka elf locks, stealing small items, and leading a traveler astray. More dangerous behaviors were also attributed to fairies. Any form of sudden death might have stemmed from a fairy kidnapping. The evident corpse, a magical replica of wood. 49. Consumption. Tuberculosis was sometimes blamed on fairies who forced young men and women to dance at revels every night, causing them to waste away from lack of rest. 50. Rowan trees were considered sacred to fairies. 51. And a charm tree to protect one's home. Various folklorists have proposed classification systems for fairies, using terms popularized by W.B. Yeats. Trooping fairies are those who appear in groups and might form settlements, as opposed to solitary fairies, who do not live or associate with others of their kind. In this context, the term fairy is usually held in a wider sense, including various similar beings such as dwarves and elves of Germanic folklore. 53. In Scottish folklore, fairies are divided into the Seelie Court, more beneficently inclined, but still dangerous, and the Unseelie Court, more malicious. While fairies of the Seelie court enjoyed playing generally harmless pranks on humans, those of the Unseelie court often brought harm to humans for entertainment. 43 Both could be dangerous to humans if offended. Some scholars have cautioned against the overuse of dividing fairies into types. 54 British folklore historian Dr. Simon Young noted that classification varies widely from researcher to researcher and pointed out that it does not necessarily reflect old beliefs, since those people living hundreds of years ago did not structure their experience as we do. A considerable amount of lore about fairies revolves around changelings, fairies left in the place of stolen humans. 12 In particular, folklore describes how to prevent the fairies from stealing babies and substituting changelings, and abducting older people as well. 56 The theme of the swapped child is common in medieval literature, and reflects concern over infants thought to be afflicted with unexplained diseases, disorders, or developmental disabilities. In pre-industrial Europe, a peasant family's subsistence frequently depended upon the productive labor of each member, and a person who was a permanent drain on the family's scarce resources could pose a threat to the survival of the entire family. In terms of protective charms, wearing clothing inside out. 58 Church bells, St. John's wort, and four-leaf clovers are regarded as effective. In Newfoundland folklore, the most popular type of fairy protection is bread, varying from stale bread to hardtack or a slice of fresh homemade bread. Bread is associated with the home and the hearth as well as with industry and the taming of nature, and as such seems to be disliked by some types of fairies. On the other hand, in much of the Celtic folklore, baked goods are a traditional offering to the folk, as are cream and butter. 26 The prototype of food, and therefore a symbol of life, bread was one of the commonest protections against fairies. Before going out into a fairy-haunted place, it was customary to put a piece of dry bread in one's pocket. 59 In County Wexford, Ireland in 1882, it was reported that if an infant is carried out after dark, a piece of bread is wrapped in its bib or dress, and this protects it from any witchcraft or evil. 60. Bells also have an ambiguous role. While they protect against fairies, the fairies riding on horseback, such as the Fairy Queen, often have bells on their harness. This may be a distinguishing trait between the Seelie court from the Unseelie court, such that fairies use them to protect themselves from more wicked members of their race. 61 Another ambiguous piece of folklore revolves about poultry. A cock's crow drove away fairies, but other tales recount fairies keeping poultry. 62 While many fairies will confuse travelers on the path, the will-o'-the-wisp can be avoided by not following it. Certain locations known to be haunts of fairies are to be avoided. C.S. Lewis reported hearing of a cottage more feared for its reported fairies than its reported ghosts. 63 In particular, digging in fairy hills was unwise. Paths that the fairies travel are also wise to avoid. Homeowners have knocked corners from houses because the corner blocked the fairy path. 64 And cottages have been built with the front and back doors in line so that the owners could in need leave them both open and let the fairies troop through all night. 65 Locations such as fairy forts were left undisturbed. Even cutting brush on fairy forts was reputed to be the death of those who performed the act. 66 Fairy trees such as thorn trees were dangerous to chop down. One such tree was left alone in Scotland, though it prevented a road from being widened for 70 years. Other actions were believed to offend fairies. Brownies were known to be driven off by being given clothing, though some folk tales recounted that they were offended by the inferior quality of the garments given, and others merely stated it, some even recounting that the brownie was delighted with the gift and left with it. 68 Other brownies left households or farms because they heard a complaint or a compliment. 69 People who saw tea fairies were advised not to look closely, because they resented infringements on their privacy. The need to not offend them could lead to problems. One farmer found that fairies threshed his corn, but the threshing continued after all his corn was gone, and he concluded that they were stealing from his neighbors, leaving him the choice between offending them, dangerous in itself, and profiting by the theft.